Well, I will welcome everybody again. Welcome to this first joint meeting of MuseumPests.net and Pest Odyssey. My name is Jane Thompson-Webb. I chair the Pest Odyssey group, which is a UK-based group, but we have an international membership. Do come and find us if you would like to. All are welcome. We've got a fantastic range of presentations this afternoon. There will be a little bit of a break coming up, so there will be an opportunity to go and get some refreshments. And just to say that anyone who has joined on the back of seeing the notice through ICON, the Institute of Conservation, I'm afraid I didn't think to say these are the times because I sent them the flyer and they obviously only looked at page 1. There are more than an hour and 20 minutes of presentations. So we have a fabulous 3-hour session going on here, which seems to me a superb way of spending a few hours. So if you are only expecting an hour and 20 minutes, thankfully it is being recorded. There will be some thanks at the end, but I do very much want to say thank you to Lynn Jones from Yale, who has provided us with the Zoom link today. And also very much thanks to Sue Ryder and Rachel Aronstein for getting this all together. So I'm going to hand over to Rachel now, who will give you some logistics, and I'll see you all again at the end. Have a fabulous few hours.
Rachel, you are muted.
Thank you, Adam. I feel like I'm a little out of practice with our Zoom presentations, which is a good thing because it means we're back in the world. But I want to reiterate a little bit of what Jane said and just thank everyone for joining us this morning or afternoon or potentially evening, depending on what time zone you're in. We are excited for what we hope will be an annual event and collaboration between Pest Odyssey UK group and the Museum Pests working group. And we do have an exciting number of presentations over the next few hours. As Jane mentioned, we will be recording this, and thank you again to Lynn Jones and the Yale Peabody Museum for hosting us today. We have as everyone is probably noticing, we are using Zoom meetings rather than Zoom webinar. And so we ask you, once the presentation get started, to please turn off your camera and ensure that you are muted to minimize any disruptions for the presenters. We will be taking questions using the chat after if there's time in between each presentation, and then we have allowed some time for discussion at the end of the session. So if you're following the schedule, which we up here, we have about an hour and a half of presentations, and then there will be a short break, and then we will continue afterwards. After the break with the remaining presentations. And then we have a couple of people talking about issues relating to legislation regarding sticky traps or blunder traps, and then some open discussion. The presentations are expected to be about 10 minutes long, which will allow for a couple of questions and an orderly transfer between presenters. For the presenters, we assume that you'll be sharing your own presentation. If there's any issues of bandwidth or technology, please feel free to email me your presentation and put it up for you. That leaves us, I think, 6 minutes before we are technically supposed to get started with our first presenter, which is who's Fatma, talking about developing commercially viable nanobiopesticides using herbal plants for sustainable pest management in cultural institutions. Hello, Fatma. Nice to see you. Are you going to try giving your presentation, sharing your screen, or would you like me to share for you?
I think, hi, first of all, hello everyone. Yeah, Rachel, first I would try myself. If it won't work, then I will ask to you to do. So I think I should try. Thank you.
Okay. Jane, is there anything that I've forgotten to
I think there is some disruption, and it is showing that you can't share. I think you have to do this.
let's see.
Rachel, you'll have to stop sharing
Yeah,
first
I have
in
to
order
stop
for
sharing
her.
first. Yeah. Okay, Fatma, try sharing now, and let's see if we can get your presentation up on the screen.
Story, and like, for example, the ones that you mentioned.
A bit more formal to feel that this is a contractual obligation. I mean, we're definitely on the.
Excellent. We can see your screen, Fatma. And
Yeah. So can you see
yes,
now?
I can see your full presentation. But if you want to be in presenter mode,
Yeah.
you may have to.
I think this is fine, or I have to just, yeah, this is okay for all of you?
This is perfect.
Okay, okay.
So we're gonna wait a couple minutes to get you started. Just to ensure that we're staying on schedule, and anyone who expects to see you start up at 10:20 US time will not be disappointed.
Okay, you just let me know, I'll just start it.
Yes. For those of you who are streaming in and just joining us, thank you again for joining us at what we hope will be first of an annual session of short presentations in collaboration with the Pest Odyssey UK and Museum Pest Working Group. We have a interesting variety of presentations today, some of which are new developments and a few which are updates on things that have been previously presented. And we'll be finishing with a discussion about legislation and issues relating to sticky traps in both the US and the UK. And we are recording the session, and the presenters have all committed to sharing their PowerPoints online, which will be hosted in the conferences section of the Museum Pest website. So there will be ample opportunity to catch up and review all of the information that everyone's going to be sharing with us today. Jane, was there anything you wanted to reiterate with to all the people who are joining us now?
Was there anything I wanted to reiterate? I think you covered it beautifully, and thank you, Rachel, for saying where we're going to be able to find this after today.
I'll put up a link to the page at the end so that everybody will know where to find it.
I think the only thing I will reiterate is if you are not a member of Museum Pests or Pest Odyssey, and you can be in both, please come and find us and join, and it gives an opportunity to ask lots of questions and to share useful information. So if you're not a member already, come along. It's completely free.
That is true. Do you want to mention how people find the Pest Odyssey group on?
Yeah, so you can find Pest Odyssey in a couple of places. If you just search for pestodyssey.co.uk, we do have a website, but we're also on groups.io, which is where we have the email kind of sharing group. So come along and join us. My colleague Helen manages that, and she will just be checking that you are a real person, which we do by emailing you to say, could you tell us your actual name rather than, you know, Fred thing at nowheresville.net, so that we know that you're a real person, and that we also work out if you're connected to an organization or if you're self-employed. But that's a very easy question. So hopefully we're pretty easy to find.
And for anyone who is not currently on the Pest list, which is a free Google group, the easiest way to find that is on the homepage of the MuseumPests.net website. In the second light green header at the top of the page, there's a Join the Pest list. And you have to fill out the online form, and it is not instantaneous because just like UK group, we also add people in manually to make sure that they are real people involved with IPM in the cultural heritage sector. So it may take a day or two, but that will connect you with thousands of people worldwide who are on the group. Okay.
Rachel, Pat had put a request in if you could discuss the goals of Museum Pest and Pest Odyssey and how the two groups overlap.
That is an excellent question. Jane, do you want to go first?
I think we have pretty straightforward goals with Pest Odyssey, which is we are there to be a forum to share best practice in integrated pest management, to share information about insect pests, particularly when new insect pests make it into the museum community, and to be a forum for people to be able to ask questions. And hopefully with Pest Odyssey to then be the forum to invite everybody to come to the decadal conferences. And I think that overlaps pretty well with what Museum Pests do. It's I've relatively recently joined the Pest list, and it's that very much is a forum for people to be asking all kinds of questions. So I think we're both there to try and promote good practice in IPM, to increase knowledge, and just to encourage people to be really interested in bugs, because what's not to like? Rachel, what does that compare with your thinking?
Yeah, I would say that there is a lot of overlap. I don't see that it is redundant in the sense that the Pest Odyssey group, did come out of your decades conference, and that keeps you sort of set. The Pest list has always been a free international group and was sort of one of the first products of the Museum Pests Working Group, which was previously known as the IPM Working Group. Museum Pests' mission is to promote and facilitate best practices for pest management for the collections and cultural heritage communities through the development and online distribution of training materials and other resources. So the Museum Pest Group meets annually for 2 days in the US, and the conference moves around depending on the host. And we are not actually a membership organization. Anyone who participates by contributing content to the website, coming to a meeting, is considered a participant in the Museum Pest Group, and we are grateful for the expertise and time of, at this point, hundreds of people that have made the website and the pest list vibrant resources. Okay, we have about less than 2 minutes. I think one of our lessons learned is that we don't have that much introductory material, that the next time we'll get started a little bit faster, but we do still have people streaming in. And again, for the people who've joined most recently, we are recording this presentation. We'll get started promptly at 10:20 with our first presenter. And then the presentations will last about 10 minutes each, after which there will be time for a question or two before moving on to the next presenter. And then at the end of today's program, we'll have additional time for questions and discussion. Just as a reminder, we're using Zoom meetings rather than Zoom webinar. And so we ask our participants here today to keep themselves muted and off camera until we reach any discussions. The best way to ask a question will be to send a message to the chat, and hopefully that will allow us to highlight those messages at the end of the presentation. And with that, I think, Fatma,
Yes,
probably get you started.
I'm just waiting for you. Yeah, I'm just waiting for you. So shall I start?
I think, yes, please, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. I think there is noon in UK and here in India, because I am from India. So here it is evening. So good evening, everyone. I'm truly honored to be here today at 2024 Museum Pest and Odyssey. So I'm actually concentrating on research. Yes, sorry.
We've got a labyrinth outside.
Sorry, what you asking?
Go ahead and continue. Someone's mic was off. Sorry about that, Fatma.
Okay, so am I audible to everyone?
Yes, you are good to go.
Okay, so now I think I should start. Yeah, so I'm truly honored, to be here today at 2024 Museum Pest and Odyssey. So today I'm going to focus on one of my very important research work, which I'm going to share with you all. And the topic is developing commercially viable nano-biopesticides using herbal plants for sustainable pest management in cultural institutions. So with the help of this paper, I'm going to actually represent, cutting edge approach to preserve our cultural heritage. And also where I'll talk about the integration of traditional method, okay, with the nanotechnology, which is advanced technology. So which will be united together to safeguard our rich cultural heritage. If I talk about, India, so India is one among, all other countries which having a very, a huge rich cultural heritage. So it becomes our prime responsibility to take care of. And as I have experience of more than 10 years in this field, and specifically this research work, it's not like 1 year or 2 years, more than 10 years I'm in this research. So this is the second phase of my research. And initially I have started, to preserve the cultural, heritage collections which are animal originated, to control, the pest control. Specifically, I'm talking about the insect pest with the help of indigenous methods. And where we have found, different medicinal plants and herbal plants, through which we have really able to control them and their toxic effects against those insects. And specifically in my case, where I was working on, it was a domestic beetle. It was a species of Anthranus. It was a Anthranus verbicae species. So that was my one part where I have found the toxic efficacy of different plants which are found surrounding us. And the concept was actually, to take knowledge, the traditional knowledge of our also of our country and also other country, like our grandparents. They were using, the preserving techniques of using the spices which are found in their kitchen. And with that they were able to control, pest. So the idea was this also. We have taken this idea and just want to, but integrate with some new modern idea. So that was my first phase of my research work. And then after the success of that research, but it has some limitations. So then the second phase of my research is where we were supposed to create a kind of chemical, or a kind of, pest control, sustainable pest control, which is sustainable and also may not affect the aesthetic integrity of that collection. Because as we all belong to, the cultural heritage, so we understand the physical integrity of, the cultural heritage collections, items, how important they are. So earlier when we were using those chemicals, it was in a huge amount, so we can't use directly. So the idea actually come from this project. Idea comes from there. So it was a limitation, so we want something, in advanced way, where we can just use in a very minimum amount and also may not harm the aesthetic integrity of that particular collection or specimen, and may increase the longevity of that particular collection. And also which is eco-friendly, may not harm, the the different, which is very hazardous. The earlier conventional chemicals which were used, they were very hazardous to human being, to the environment, and as well that particular collection also, because it releases several chemicals which are very dangerous, which change the the physical property of that particular collection. So yes, I think this introduction was very much necessary. So coming from that, now I will start my this ideas. I just want to share with you all. So the aim of this research work is to develop an environmentally friendly and efficient pest control solution for cultural heritage institutions. So with the help of diffusion, as I told, the combining the power of nanotechnology and the traditional, preservation technique, conservation technique method. So here we are supposed to find innovative, eco-friendly solution, sustainable pest management method, you can say. Yeah. So just wait. Yeah. So coming towards the introduction, I would like to start. As I have already introduced, I have already told you that why it is important and why we are, doing this. I have already described this, but the very important, reason behind this idea is actually to commercialize, to make like the entrepreneur aspect of this project is very much we want to emphasize on this, because India is also, it's working on very much today's for employment, for increasing the employment. And so it's actually depending on a self-reliant in India initiative, which is known as Atmanirbhar Bharat, and which supports, and empower the small and medium enterprises and aims to foster a new generation of job creators. So this initiative is a testament, you can say, to India's commitment to economic diversification. And in this paper, I will address the global concern which is associated with the synthetic insecticide, including their adverse impact on non-target organisms, development of pest resistance, and environmental pollution. So I propose this innovative solution to combat these challenges, ensuring safer, more sustainable pest control method for the future. So now coming towards the research gap, like what was the reason and why this work, it comes up. And so there was actually, it emphasizes the significant research gap, I can say, in the field of pest control for preservation of cultural heritage. It actually recognizes the limited focus on safeguarding cultural heritage, the constraints of traditional methods, the need for integrated solutions combining nanotechnology and traditional materials, the absence of standardized regulation, the untapped potential of global collaboration, and the nascent status of nanotechnology in this application. So addressing these gaps is imperative to establish sustainable, effective, and environmentally friendly practices for preserving our cultural heritage. So yeah, now coming towards the objective. So the objective is to develop commercially, as earlier I just explained this, that we aim to develop environmentally friendly nanobiopesticides that are safe for humans and effective in controlling insect pests in heritage institutions. And secondly, we intend to re-evaluate the traditional pest control methods and explore sustainable alternatives, as I just mentioned as I started this presentation. Thirdly, we seek to harness nanobiomaterials and assess their efficacy and safety in comparison to conventional pesticides. And our approach integrates tradition with innovation, supporting sustainable pest control while aligning the self-reliant India initiative, which I have just told you. This research also prioritizes enhancing the longevity of objects and specimens in cultural heritage settings, promoting eco-friendly pest control practices, and contributing to global heritage preservation efforts. So now I'm coming towards the methodology, which is one of the most important part, because earlier, I would like to tell you something very interesting. The conventional pesticides which were used to control insect pest or whatever the pest in the museum settings or in any cultural heritage settings, the emission of carbon gas, which is responsible for, greenhouse gas effect, which is responsible for the global warming. So that gases are so much, are emitting in that concept, from the manufacturing to transportation to the application process. So this was something, and the substitution which we are working and which we want to to execute is actually replacing that problem, that issue. So now coming toward the research methodology, here what happened, this methodology implementing nanotechnology-based pest control in cultural heritage institutions, it comprises several key steps. starting with the synthesis of nanoparticle, and then extraction of botanical materials, and then we will use those extracts, and then we will actually load with the nanoparticles, and also if needed biopolymers can be also used, and then we will prepare a core shell nanoparticle. And so efficacy and the safety are rigorously analyzed with a focus on minimizing potential toxicity to mammalian cells. Material properties are characterized using various techniques, and the results are compiled and reported in scientific journals and to the funding agencies. These are the process. And the methodology allows for flexibility in conducting research steps depending on available facilities and resources, emphasizing the importance of collaboration between researcher and institution. So this is the, the flow chart. You can see here that how the process will be go, and how it will go, and how the synthesis, there are the two different methods through which we can create, and then how it will combine with the plants and nanoparticles, and then the end formulation is nanobiopesticide. And so next, talking about the the current status of the technology, which is very important, so including the technology readiness. So the current status of nanotechnology-based pest control present a promising landscape both at the national and the international levels. Nationally, active research and laboratory studies are underway with varying levels of technology readiness. There is a growing awareness and adoption of nanotechnology-based solutions, particularly for safeguarding valuable artifacts in cultural heritage institutions. Moreover, national regulatory frameworks are continually, evolving to govern the use of nanotechnology in pest control. At the international level, there's a notable increase in global collaboration, knowledge sharing, and the establishment of research network. However, challenges in standardization persist due to regulatory variations between countries. Despite these challenges, there are strong emphasis on global technology transfer to support heritage preservation worldwide. And coupled with international effort to raise awareness and build capacity for the effective use of nanotechnology-based pest control methods, collaborations and knowledge exchange will be key to advancing this field on a global scale. So now coming towards the most important part, which is the expected outcomes of this proposal, of this research idea. The multifaceted significance of applying nanotechnology in pest control for cultural heritage is, I think it's a truly remarkable. It will be truly remarkable. It directly contributes to the preservation of cultural treasures, ensuring their longevity, as I have earlier discussed this, for future generation. What makes this approach even more extraordinary is the unique aspect of the high surface to volume ratio inherent to nanotechnology. These characteristics allow for precision targeting of pests while minimizing damage to valuable collections. While nanotechnology, the efficacy of pest control is greatly enhanced as nanoparticles which can penetrate the exoskeleton of insects more effectively, resulting in higher pest mortality rates. The high surface to volume ratio of nanomaterial is a key driver in reducing the environmental impacts of pest control by enabling the more rapid breakdown of pesticides. It also enhances human safety, particularly in cultural heritage institutions where staff and visitors are in close proximity to treated objects. Additionally, it promotes sustainability in pest control, allowing for methods that remain effective over extended periods. This not only reduces the frequency of reapplication, but also minimizes the overall quantity of pesticide which will be used. So this innovative approach goes beyond traditional methods, demonstrating India's commitment to innovation and leadership in cultural heritage preservation. It fosters opportunities for global collaboration and entrepreneurship, ultimately creating economic prospects. In doing so, it leaves a profound and lasting legacy, inspiring and benefiting generations to come. And this game-changing application of nanotechnology will highlight the unwavering dedication to safeguarding our heritage, and also it may recognize as a model for preservation of cultural heritage globally. And finally, I would come to the conclusion. Okay, so the research proposal, it epitomizes the synergy of innovation, sustainability, which is now, we are talking very much, it's a high time, it's the need of our, and the cultural heritage preservation. Leveraging the potential of nanotechnology, we aspire to redefine pest control method in cultural heritage institutions. So the outline objective highlight the unwavering commitment to protecting our invaluable heritage. So the initiative is both timely and indispensable, aligning with the global shift towards sustainable conservation. The utilization of nanobiomaterials and as nanobiopesticide opens up a new horizon in pest control, ensuring the durability of priceless artifacts while upholding environmental and human safety, which is a prime concern. International collaboration and knowledge exchange will guide our path forward. Although challenges such as standardization and regulation exist, they are surmountable. Together, we can bridge tradition and innovation, uniting the past and future in the service of safeguarding our shared heritage. The comprehensive and meticulous approach from nanoparticle synthesis to safety analysis promises not only effective results, but also valuable contribution to the global scientific community. This research is not merely about offering solutions, it's about, I would say, that leaving an enduring legacy. So what my effort is that would be to enrich the cultural heritage sector and inspire future generations to embrace the potential of innovation in the noble cause of preservation. Thank you so much for listening me patiently. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Fatma.
Yeah.
That gives us a lot to think about. You packed a lot into your time, and we're a couple minutes over, so we're not going to take questions on your presentation now, but hopefully at the break or at the end of the program, we'll have time. Again, for our viewers, if you have questions, please put them into the chat. We will highlight those when we are able. Our next presenter is going to be David Laughlin on managing webbing clothes moth naturally. David, are you able to turn on your camera and your presentation? Wonderful, thank you. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you very much. Is that all working for everybody?
We can see your presentation. Yes.
Okay, that's all I need to know to start. Okay, that's great. Well, this is just a quick follow-up, really, to a presentation which was given by Rachel Jarvis of the National Trust back in September 2021 at the last Pest Odyssey group meeting. For those who are not familiar with Historionics, it's a small product supply business based in South Wales in the UK. And I had the pleasure of taking over responsibility for the business in January 2020. Gosh, 4.5 years ago now already, after the sad loss of Bob Child. This is, sorry, I've got things all over my screen. This is the Blickling Estate. It's a lovely building to the northeast, or to the east of England, about 2-3 hours northeast of London, for those who are not familiar with the UK. Lovely red brick building. It's a huge country estate. But it was presented to me, I guess, in the early 2020s, more or less just after I'd taken on responsibility for Historionics, as having a bit of a moth problem. And one of the reasons for that is, of course, it houses a very fine collection of textiles. The number of moths that were present actually within the building probably represented 15% of the overall webbing clothes moth occurrences across all of the National Trust sites. So it was actually number 1 on the list of all the properties within the Trust ownership. Quite a complex structure. And of course, in 2020, we're all very familiar that one of the things that happened was that the entire world became affected by COVID. And one of the issues we had was there an easy solution to actually be able to manage moths in a situation where there's a very small number of staff on site able to cover? This graph basically shows you what's been happening in the preceding 6 years. So essentially the numbers had grown slowly year on year to about 2017, and then generally had stayed sort of between 1,500 and 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 moths per year across the entire building. So what I suggested was whether there's a possibility of actually looking at a natural or a biological approach. In a way, this sort of follows on quite nicely from Fatma's presentation. Looking at a sort of a two-pronged attack. Biological solutions fall into many, many categories. You got viruses, you got fungus, you have good insects to control bad insects. So what I suggested in this case was actually a combination of two things. One is a pheromone approach, coupled with a macro biological in the form of a parasitoid wasp. And that's what we started off with. But this presentation will continue on and show you what we've been doing since. Because in 2023, we also looked at a pheromone-only system and comparing two different systems. And then just this year, we're actually just looking at one system alone. So hopefully this presentation will give you an overview of what we've done in the past and where we are currently. This is what we started off with the pheromone system. This is what used to be called the Exosect product from a company called Exosect, which was formed in the year 2000, more or less, from Southampton University. It's a wax tab, which is formulated with the pheromone for webbing clothes moth. The principle being that the moth actually is attracted to that wax block, picks up the wax blocks on its body, and the close proximity of the pheromone on the antennae and on the body of the moth actually makes it very difficult for male moths to orientate towards the pheromone, which is being released by female moths. The principle being you get fewer breeding encounters, a lower number of eggs, and therefore less larvae and hopefully less damage. So that was a system which was already present, it was already being used, but maybe not very widely developed. The second approach was a biological. It was this little wasp. Actually, using the name wasp actually got the publicity office in the National Trust very excited, and as a consequence, they put out a press release, and we were inundated by requests looking for supplies of the wasp. That little card on the left-hand side, about the size of a credit card. You've got 2,000 parasitized eggs within that card. And of course, once you introduce the card, they hatch, and the little wasps that you can see in the video in the bottom right-hand corner, they begin to emerge, and the females then go hunting to lay their eggs on the eggs of the moth. So that the emergent larvae then burrows into the egg and eats the moth egg. The wasps typically live 2 to 3 weeks once they've been introduced, so you have to make frequent introductions every 2 to 3 weeks in order to make sure you've got a viable population. Normally, I say normally, we didn't have a huge amount of experience with the system. Normally, you'd do at least 4 to 8 introductions, so maybe over a 2 to 4 month period if you had a problem within a small environment. Because it's a much bigger building with a much greater problem, we actually introduced the moths every 2 to 3 weeks for the entire year. Or in fact, the entire 2 years. So this is in a nutshell, in numbers, we basically divided the house into a first floor and second and ground floor treatment, more or less equal numbers of rooms on both floors. So we treated the first floor with a combination of parasitoid wasps and the pheromone, and then we treated the ground floor with the pheromone only. As I said before, we had to change the wasp cards every couple of weeks, whereas we changed the pheromone dispenser every 2 to 3 months. The label says 2 months, but we kind of stretched it a couple of times just to sort of see if there was any impact. Before treatment, this is more or less the picture that we had, just taken 2020. So the first year I took on Histrionics, this is more or less the situation. The total number of moths in the house is about 2,000 individuals. For the rooms that we were looking at, that equated to about 1,400 or 1,500 rooms, slightly more on the first floor than the ground floor. So you've got to bear that in mind when we're actually looking at the performance of the two systems. But a typical first peak emergence after the winter sort of period, and a slight sort of second emergence possibly after sort of the summer feeding and a small secondary generation, but otherwise falling down to nothing over the colder winter months. And I'm just going to go straight into numbers. Essentially, over the 2 years, we managed to reduce the number of moths down to about 21% of the 2022 level. So from the 2039 number down to 432. So you can see that the whiter numbers going into the darker numbers. The darker columns essentially is the 2022 figures. And that was only with the pheromone and the parasitoid wasps. And this is the information that we more or less presented at the Pest Odyssey meeting. So, but those who actually didn't see the end results, this is basically what we achieved just slightly after that point. Looking at it on a floor-by-floor basis, so taking the first floor where we had, say, the two systems in place on the ground floor, what was surprising actually is we didn't really see a benefit of actually having the wasps. This just looks at the actual rooms where there are treatments taking place. There were a couple of other areas which I haven't factored into this this chart. There's a couple of apartments on site, and always when people are living within these heritage properties, that can present a problem because quite often the same form of IPM process isn't taking place inside those apartments as it is in the rest of the building, and that applies, dare I say it, equally to whether it's a staff apartment, so actually a trust employee, or even if it's a shared building where the owners of the property are still living in parts of the house, and they can actually create a reservoir effect, allowing moths to survive and then reinfest the property. But as far as these rooms that we were looking at were concerned, we actually saw a greater reduction in moths on the ground floor compared to the first floor. But again, bearing in mind, we probably had a higher number of moths in the first floor. So in some ways, we haven't done any statistics on these, and we don't plan to. If you buried in deeply enough, I would probably say that there wasn't a great significant difference. We were more or less seeing the same effect with the two systems combined to the pheromone only. So last year, we basically asked ourselves the question, can we make life any easier? Can we remove costs? It wasn't cheap to actually introduce the parasitoid wasps every 2 to 3 weeks. Similarly with the CL tab. So we wanted to know, could we just rely on the pheromone only? And also I wanted to know whether there was a better pheromone dispenser out on the market that we could possibly use. Because there was an element of even inconvenience and resource time inconvenience by changing the pheromone tabs every 2 months. So I wanted to see if we actually could extend that. So I drew upon my experience in the biological sector to see if we actually could find somebody to supply us with a pheromone dispenser with a much longer profile, which we actually managed to do. So this is a dispenser which is actually used in agriculture and horticulture for managing all sorts of horticultural pests. It's a long life dispenser, will actually last 6 months. Works differently from the insect tracker Exosec system in that here it's releasing the pheromone into the atmosphere, so it creates a cloud effect, so that when the male moth is hunting for the female, he's just overwhelmed by pheromone in the air, and so he can't orientate towards the female moths. So you get the same disruption effect, and that they're not able to find females, and therefore the outcome, in essence, is the same, albeit that the mode of action is different. What we're looking for, of course, is a long-term and affordable population management tool. And all along, I've been trying to think of a way of actually keeping the cost down and making it a very cost-effective solution for anyone to use. This is a side-by-side view of the two systems. You've got the long-life pheromone dispenser on the top, much higher loading of pheromone, 180 milligrams, compared to the wax tab of 5 milligrams. At 180 milligrams, obviously, oozes out through the walls of the dispenser. You don't need to open it or anything. It simply seeps through the polymer walls of the capsule into the atmosphere. So you need a good reservoir initially for that period to cover the full 6 months. The application rate is more or less the same, 1 per 25 square meters. But of course, no two buildings are the same, no two rooms are the same. there's an element of having to understand the complexity, airflows, and so on within a room, within a space, and you have to play around with those rates. Which is why when you actually see the actual numbers in 2023, when I say that we use between 38 and 42 T-Protect dispensers, we might have started off with 38, but then maybe increased in a couple of rooms, maybe one or two more in certain places, just to cover when we actually maybe got a bit of an outbreak. And that's certainly what we saw last year. So if you compare the previous year, 2022, on the first floor, we're getting 225 moths in those rooms. Last year, we got 142, so that was a 37% reduction, even though we had a big spike in June. And that came down to one particular room, which has been a bit problematical over the years, where we had a bit of a flare-up. I still suspect possibly there's something amiss with the chimney, with the flue, and it could be a bird's nest situation where the moths are coming into the property. But interestingly, and this is the whole purpose of this test, we were doing a comparison against the two systems, against the long life dispenser on the first floor and the CL tab on the second floor. Again, not hugely scientific, not hugely statistically valid, but we didn't really perceive a difference. The ultimate aim was getting a reduction in the number of moths, and that is what we feel we have achieved. And that essentially is the overview till the end of 2023. So we've gone from a combination effect with pheromones and wasps to comparing two different pheromone systems. And we've managed to bring the numbers down from 2,000 or over 2,000 down to 248 across the entire property for last year. Of course, this is a long life system. It's something which we want to say we've got a long-term effect, so we want to know, can we make it life easier? So this year, what we're looking at is, can we just test and use the long life dispenser only? And the beauty of that is you only have to change it 2 times per year. You may even be able to, in certain situations, get away with just once per year. If you run it from, say, March through to September, you're covering the main breeding periods. And this is where we are today. Hot off the press, we're up to the end of April. I don't have May figures just yet. And we're seeing a slight increase. Every year is different. I don't know about the rest of the world, but here in the UK, we've had a very mild, wet, dull winter and spring. Certainly hasn't been very cold, and that might itself actually allowed a certain number of insects to survive better than they might have done otherwise. I'm not unduly concerned. We have actually increased the number of dispensers in the rooms where we saw the increase in numbers. No system is perfect. No system is finished. It's all about adaptation, and we're still learning as we go through how we actually can implement a pheromone system to actually manage moths. I'm hoping by the end of this year that we'll actually have plateaued, but we'll see. What we do know is we've managed to get the number of moths down significantly from 2020 down to 2023. We've gone from 2,000 down to so far 432, and we're dropping. No apparent benefit in using the wasps. The reduction continued using pheromones only down to 2,238 in 2023. And we're continuing this year to see if the numbers will plateau or can be reduced further, or possibly even increase. I mean, it remains to be seen. This is a live study that's ongoing. And as far as the long life dispenser is concerned, I feel it's a tool that we can use to manage webbing closed moth. It's never going to be a standalone solution. No one product is. It is part of an IPM program. So I would say there's as much benefit from increased housekeeping, if not more benefit from increased housekeeping and using that number one tool in the armory, which is a vacuum cleaner. We certainly had that limitation in 2020, 2021, when there was basically just 1 or 2 people on site. And so they didn't have the scope to carry on the same level of housekeeping. So I'm assuming that the pheromone and the wasps actually had that effect. Again, we don't know. Because what I want to do is obviously take this system out into other sites and other locations and see if we actually can reproduce the effect that we've seen at Blickling. We're looking for a long-term effect. It's not a quick solution. You have to be able to monitor quite closely to know what's going on. And one of the advantages, which I didn't say earlier, that we have at Blickling is that they check their traps every month, which is not typical of all of the National Trust properties, where they typically do it on a quarterly basis. But it does provide scope to avoid or minimize insecticide use. And I say we are continuing studies ongoing and gathering data in other locations. So hopefully at a meeting not too far away, I may be able to present another update. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, David. We are going to move straight on to our next presentation, and hopefully we'll be able to take questions at the end before the break. Our next presenters will be Sophie Ellman and Stephanie Richardson-Jones. Sophie, I hope I did not mangle your last name. Their presentation, case study, Dagobium penniseum biscuit beetle infestation in the Museum of London's library, is coming up next.
Thanks, Rachel. Hopefully that's visible to everyone.
Not yet.
Yeah.
There you go. Awesome.
Right. Thank you. So just to introduce myself, I'm Steph Richardson-Jones. I'm a collection care conservator at the Museum of London. And together with my colleague Sophie, I'm going to take you through a case study of a biscuit beetle infestation in the library at our London Wall site. Just to give you a little bit of background to our museum, in case anyone isn't familiar with us. We're a social history museum telling the history of London and Londoners. We have two museums, one in London Wall in the City of London and one in London's Docklands. Our London Wall site is a 1970s building, which we closed to the public in December 2022 as we prepare to move to a new museum in nearby Farringdon, which we plan to open in 2026. Our library holds around 30,000 volumes relating to the history and archaeology of London. It also holds around 5,000 rare books, including some important individual collections, such as the Bell collection on the Great Plague and Fire, and the Tanguy collection of Oliver Cromwell manuscripts and memorabilia. So in April last year, we started receiving reports that a large number of beetles are being found on the windowsills in the library and in the library office, as well as on people's desks in the library office. This was reported to Collection Care via our dedicated Pest email address. And on first discovering them, we were our initial thoughts were that they were either biscuit beetle or furniture beetle, but we found when comparing them to biscuit beetles in our pest library that what we were finding appeared slightly darker and less red in colour, which you might be able to make out on the photo on the right on the blunder trap. Also, which is often a problem, the adults we found were often really dusty, which made it a bit more difficult to tell how hairy the beetles were and thus to identify them. So these factors both added to a slight doubt initially over whether they were biscuit beetle or furniture beetle. But under magnification, we found that they didn't have the characteristic humped thorax of the furniture beetle. So we determined that they were biscuit beetle. Also, there were some contextual clues that were helpful in giving us confidence in our identification. The library typically has a lower RH, which isn't favourable for furniture beetle. And for the number of adults we were seeing, we'd expect to see some emergence holes and frass in nearby wood, which we didn't see. So now we had a sound identification, we started to take some steps to tackle the outbreak. And we were very conscious of the fact that the library collection could be at risk, as biscuit beetle larvae can obviously damage books containing starch and animal glue. So we carried out a deep clean of the library and the library office. We checked that staff weren't storing food in the office and asked for plants to be removed. We carried out spot checking of collections with the help of paper conservators, particularly of some at-risk materials, but luckily no damage was found to any objects. We knew that they were being found on the windowsills as the adults will travel towards the light, but we wanted to try and get a sense of where the activity was coming from. So we placed additional blunder traps in the library, one at each corner of the room, which we monitored weekly. We also started to investigate the area to try and find the source of the outbreak. So we looked in adjoining rooms, corridors and cupboards and identified an adjoining office as a potential source. On investigating this office, we found many adult beetles. We found that staff regularly ate in there. We also found that it was quite messy with lots of equipment stored and left undisturbed around the perimeter of the room. And we found that it was not being regularly cleaned. So we suspected that this could be the site where the larvae were developing. As we were monitoring the additional blunder traps that we placed, we found new adults, particularly on the traps at the back of the library, which were near this suspect adjoining office. So we arranged a deep clean of the office and advised staff not to store food in there. And we also organised weekly cleaning in the library and the library office. We continued to investigate some other potential sources. We investigated our Versatemp heating and cooling units, which were located underneath the windowsills in both the library and the adjoining office, removing the top grills to look inside the housing of the units, and found that they were quite dirty, and we suspected this could contain debris or maybe dropped food, which could be another potential food source for them. In August, we did another round of deep cleaning and spot checking of collections and placed blunder traps in the adjoining office too. And from the autumn, we found that the numbers of beetles had dropped slightly, but we thought this may have simply been a result of seasonal change. So while the situation had improved, we didn't feel confident that we'd completely eradicated the biscuit beetle. So there was a lot of head scratching and definitely a few nightmares where we were waking up in cold sweats after having dreamed of discovering kind of swarms of biscuit beetles inside a book, but not really a satisfying resolution. So I'm going to pass over to my colleague Sophie, who will tell you what we discovered next.
Thanks, Steph. Hi, I'm Sophie. I'm the other collections conservator at the Museum of London. So I'm going to quickly run through the discovery of the source, or what we thought was the source, and what the outcomes of that were. Okay, so in November 2023, Chris Swindles from Kiwa, which is an independent rodent consultant company, visited our London Wall site. He was carrying out an inspection to advise on rodent management. Rodent management doesn't currently fall under the remit of collections care at the moment, that the contractors are managed by facilities, but we work closely with facilities on this, and we're all part of the museum's pest management steering group. And because we had such a high stake in rodent management, we were accompanying the consultant during his inspection. We mentioned to Chris that we'd had an increase in biscuit beetle population in the library, and his suspicions were aroused when he noticed some blue-green powder next to some of the rodent bait boxes. When the boxes were opened, we found hundreds of larvae and casts visible, and the beetles, the larvae beetles, had obviously been feeding on the bait, as you can see from these slightly terrifying images. During the inspection of the library, Chris noticed that the rodent bait boxes were non-standard, and obviously he, as a pest consultant, had the keys to access all of the bait boxes. When he examined them, he was able to see that they were from an old contractor and they'd been in place for several years. And there were some that we found in the adjoining offices as well. In the images, you can see the biscuit beetle larvae casts and the adults are visible as well. There's also cereal husks that you can see in the bait. Obviously, they're not insects, but they were to be a big problem. So again, looking at the bait boxes, Chris identified that the bait used was cereal based. Yeah, as soon as we open the box, you can see from the middle image that the beetles had obviously consumed most of the bait. And it was clear that this was a big issue. Obviously, without Chris, we wouldn't have been able to get into these old rodent bait boxes. The bait that we were familiar with for rodents is the paste-based bait, which I've put a poster on the right-hand side, which I'm sure everyone will know. But yeah, we hadn't come across the cereal-based bait before. And Chris informed us that the cereal-based bait hasn't been used in London for several years. It is used in more rural locations, but I think London mice prefer a different diet. They're like a greasier diet. So yeah, we've been learning more about mouse preferences and what baits they like. We've been looking at the BPCA blog, the taste test, and various other sources. So when we looked more closely at the open bait boxes, we noticed another species of insect that Chris said could potentially be parasitoid wasps. There were several wasps in most traps that were alive. Obviously, we haven't officially identified the wasps, but we thought it was interesting that the fact that the biscuit beetle were able to support a population of wasps. And that, again, supports what we've been finding, that it's a fairly well-established population and they've potentially been around for a long time. And yeah, there was wasps in most of the traps that we'd looked at. So in terms of our actions, what we did next, the first thing we did was to remove and isolate all the old bait boxes. We then observed them to make sure that we had correctly identified that this was the problem with the biscuit beetle on the traps. And talking to Chris again further about this, he flagged work that had been done at the RHS herbarium using biscuit beetle pheromone traps. So we read up about that, and we've been trialing some pheromone tablet lures. And we placed these on sticky blunder traps within the moth trap holders next to windows to see if we caught any adults. And we hope this might help to reduce the population. So since removing the old bait boxes, we haven't actually had any new catches on the blunder traps. We haven't had any catches on the pheromone lures. And there's been no further reports of beetles on windowsills. And we haven't found any during our inspections. We are bearing in mind that it has been fairly cold recently, so we're still kind of expecting to find a few, but none so far. None of the collections have been damaged, so that was good. And I think our main conclusions were that we learnt a lot about the dangers of cereal-based bait as a food source for insects. We wondered whether rodent take and interest in the bait boxes can then make them more appealing to insect pests. So I think that is going to impact how we work with the rodent bait boxes moving forward. We're also working with facilities to remove any old rodent traps that we can find throughout the buildings on all of our sites. And we're also working with the current rodent contractors to ensure that they remove all their old boxes and that they improve the documentation for their current bait boxes as well. And I think we've learned to think of the bait boxes as a food source for lots of different animals and insects, and we're very aware of the potential for them to act as lures to a number of different pests. I think that's it from us.
Thank you, Steph and Sophie. Next up, we have Armando Mendez talking about standard operation procedures for touring exhibitions. Hello, Armando.
Hello, Rachel and everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone. This is not so much a presentation, but actually a call for collaboration. International collaboration will be great if possible, because it's very much an IPM international issue that I wanted to talk about today. We are seeing increased operations on touring exhibitions at the Natural History Museum in London, where I work in conservation. But we are partly responsible for items on the move. One of the things that come up regularly is request for standard operation protocols, procedures, and the basics are all there, quarantine times and blah, blah. But I think it will be really good to have a document that will summarize, sometimes with hyperlinks to other documents that are already on the website. For example, the treatments on the MuseumPest website and so on. So I've been tasked with writing this document for the NHM touring exhibitions team, but I thought I'll take this opportunity to ask everyone here if you would like to collaborate with me. I have a draft, so it will be adding to that draft, and then just narrowing and polishing a little bit about what exactly do we need, how far do we need to go into legislation, into individual or large organizational protocols, and what can be just downsized to what we really need to put on. And I've been trying to share my screen, but I don't know how to do it because I haven't used Zoom for years. Sorry, guys, I prefer meetings in person. So yeah, I promised Lynn that I was going to be very short because this was, as I said, just a call out for collaboration. If anyone is interested, my email is a.mendes@nhm.ac.uk. I think you can find out on the Museum Pest website as well. So if you're interested, please drop me a line. I'll send you the draft I have. And yeah, maybe we can have a nice collaboration, nice institutional and international collaboration on writing this down. I think it will be in everybody's interest to have it standardized and have something that will benefit everybody, because that's the nature of touring exhibitions. They go everywhere or a lot of places. So yeah, that's me then. Thank you for listening. And I'm looking forward to receiving your emails with enthusiastic requests for collaboration.
Thank you, Armando.
That's all right.
I think everybody will probably agree that the more we move art around, the higher potential there is for moving pests around. Do you are you able to share any instances of things that have happened from touring exhibitions that you've seen already?
I personally haven't seen infestations happening during touring exhibitions because I think the timing is quite short, but I have been told and I have seen evidence of infestations moving around with touring exhibitions. And I had one really particular case where we were sending one of our terracotta lions. So we have anyone who has visited the Natural History Museum in London has seen the big terracotta statues on the facade, and one of our lions that was never put in place, had been in the garden for God knows how many years, was going to Japan on a touring exhibition. It was our Treasures of the NHM exhibition. And before it went, it became clear that the Japanese authorities wouldn't let the lion go through without treatment. And, it was a 1 ton, 1.7 meter tall terracotta thing, very heavy, very big. We couldn't put it in the freezer. It was covered in organics, so lichen, lichens, mosses, you name it. Probably all sorts of creepy crawlies inside the little crevices because terracotta is very porous. So we did we gave it a conservation clean, but that clearly wasn't enough. It needed treatment, and the Japanese authorities requested some kind of formal agreement on a treatment and something that will guarantee the safety of this particular statue going through their customs. In the end, I managed to take it to the British Museum and do a do an anoxic treatment on it, on the chamber that I have at the VM. At the time, it took a crazy drive through central London and a parking ticket outside the VM. But we managed to get the lion on time. But it was very, very cut very fine with the deadline we had for the lion traveling. It literally finished the treatment and it went for the cargo plane. So trying to avoid instances like that where people are more aware. So the documents should be a little bit more than a standard operation procedure, but I was thinking of maybe a separate document, both linked together, one with advice on, you know, the time that you need to allow to prepare for it, the kind of customs requirements that you may find in different countries, so people are aware, because more and more the specialists doing touring exhibitions are going to come to us, IPM specialists, asking, hey, do you know what's happening in this country, or how do we treat this, or how we take this from A to B within IPM parameters and blah. So that's my, hence me asking.
Thank you. For those of you who haven't seen, Armando's email has been put into the chat, and I hope you will get a robust response. Fran, you're up next. We have Fran Ritchie with What Happens in the Dark, a massive moth infestation case study. And I know that she has some exciting images to share with us.
Okay, on my watch, I still have 18 minutes after. Should I go ahead and start now, though?
That is correct. I think we are probably okay. I think we're holding steady in our participants, so I'd say let's just jump right in.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Fran Ritchie. I'm a conservator with the U.S. National Park Service. I'm based in Harpers Ferry Center, which is in West Virginia. We service all of the National Park Service sites, though. Any park that has a project with us is able to contact us to help them with work, or sometimes they call or email us with questions, seeking advice and whatnot. In November of 2022, I was contacted by a visitor center that actually was not in the National Park Service, but is part of the Department of Interior, but I will have them remain anonymous during this presentation. They had actually already contacted Rachel and a few others in the field because they had noticed some moths flying around and some damage to their taxidermy, and they were kind of calling around, trying to figure out what next steps they should take. But it became very clear very quickly that they didn't have very much IPM experience or even kind of museum experience in general. And so they were really starting at the ground level. I was able to travel to the site about a week and a half or 2 weeks later to inspect it myself and get to see everything in person and to provide further recommendations for them. So I'm not presenting anything groundbreaking today, but there are so few published incidences of big infestations that I really wanted this presentation to serve as a case study, specifically for those of you attending who haven't yet had the opportunity or the experience of responding to this type of emergency. So I'm going to show you what I found, what we think were the causes of the infestation, and what the recommendations were. This is a wildlife center of sorts based in the Northeast United States. There's one large room with an exhibit, and that's what you see in the image. Directly off of this room, there's a foyer with taxidermy mounts on open display near a small gift shop and like a greeting area. There's a large educational room with taxidermy and study skins and other kind of educational props. And then there are also a few offices in the building. The exhibit, as you see, is behind glass, and it represents different seasons in that region. And so there are information panels, there are taxidermy mounts, some replicas, animals like reptiles and whatnot. And then there's faux and real plant material. And here's a view, two images of the view of the top of this exhibit case. In the right-hand photo, you can see that the plexiglass is not sealed around that tree trunk that's coming out of it. And you might be able to tell, the images are kind of confusing, but a few of the panels do open up and act as doors, but they're not necessarily very well sealed. Starting to examine the taxidermy in the scene, such as this kingfisher, you can see damaged feathers, bald spots emerging on its back, and insect larval casings kind of scattered throughout. And you can see the casings, in fact, on the beak and on the back of the kingfisher. And so that already got my attention, but what really got me were these birds and other freeze-dried specimens in the case. These two were eaten almost beyond recognition. You can tell the one on the right is a robin, but the one on the left, it's difficult to know what the exact species is. And the damaged areas from the pest eating it expose the internal body parts that would not remain if it were traditional taxidermy. So that's how we knew that these were actually freeze-dried specimens, because we shouldn't be able to see that much, especially the ribs in the bird on the left. When you have freeze-dried taxidermy, that has the most organic material remaining in it. During the process, those internal organs are not removed like they would be in traditional taxidermy. So these are the tastiest pieces that are in this entire exhibit. And you can even see on the image on the right, those round kind of brown pebbles type things that are in between the ribs. That is all the frass from the infestation. This is an unfortunate mammal that had all of its hair eaten off. The dark areas that you see on top of the skin are actually compacted areas of frass. And the worm is a replica, obviously. There were also pull-out drawers below the exhibit area that also had organic materials in them, and they were infested with clothing moths and with domestic beetles. Now, the typical response, as hopefully we all know, would be to remove and isolate the taxidermy, to freeze them, to try to kill off the pests, to clean the taxidermy and the exhibit, and then to reinstall everything afterwards. But that was not possible for most of the objects. The exhibit design did not allow for it. You can see the squirrel in the bottom left-hand photo. It has all of its hair eaten off, and that's just frass that's on there. And the circle that's in the larger photo is where that squirrel is located in the exhibit. And I want you to take note of that red line that you see in that larger image. And that line indicates how far the museum staff could reach into the exhibit. So as you can tell, if I toggle back to the first image, that it was just impossible to reach the taxidermy and even to reach all of the exhibitry material that would need to be cleaned as well. And there was also taxidermy on open display in the exhibit hall, in the education room, and in the foyer kind of greeting area and store. And they had signs of pest infestation to varying degrees. The study skins had shed larval casings all over them, embedded frass, and hairs were even sloughing off the side. The black bear fared a little bit better. It just had adult moths, those white specks that you see in the black fur, those are adult moths that were kind of embedded in the fur. And there were no visible signs of bald spots yet, but I'm sure that there was still some munching of the larva underneath that we couldn't see. During this visit, I also was able to use X-ray fluorescence to test for the presence of arsenic on the mount, so that we would know if they were to be disposed of, that they would have to be disposed of as hazardous waste. And pretty much everything did test positive for arsenic, except of course for the freeze-dried specimens. It's not part of their preparation, but it also would be unusual to see them like that if they had been treated with arsenic. But as we can tell from this bufflehead, even if it does have arsenic, that doesn't mean that it's going to be completely protected from pest damage. And in the image on the right, those are the feet of the bird, and you can see that the webbing skin has been eaten off completely. Most of the feet are gone. So despite the presence of arsenic, you can still have significant damage. And of course, the only taxidermy that was not infested were the mounts that were housed in lidded plastic bins in the education room. So there were no signs of infestation on any of these mounts. Here's a little summary of the findings that I just mentioned, but what I want to point out to you is that while we were there, on this site visit, there were no sightings of flying moths or adult domestic beetles, but damage had increased in the month time that the woman first took photographs and sent them to me, and that we were there to actually see them in person. So that indicated that they were just in a non-flying phase of their life cycle during the visit. And that's just a really good thing to keep in mind, because if you're going to a site that's normally not one that people visit very frequently, you need to do a lot more poking around than just kind of looking for signs in the air. And it's also a really good idea to have photos of everything on exhibit with you when you're doing an inspection, so you can see if there has been a change over time. And what do we think led to this infestation? We never found a kind of ground zero point. There was no discarded wool blanket or hat behind someone's desk or something like that. And we don't know for sure that it wasn't there prior to COVID, but I do think that this is a case of an infestation happening because of the lack of human activity in the building during the time period when it was closed for COVID. As I mentioned, I was there in November of 2022, so it had been shuttered for 2.5 years. And during that time, people really hadn't been in the building. There was no housekeeping or no IPM plan even before all of this, but there certainly was not any cleaning happening while it was shut. So it was this dark, undisturbed building with lots of tasty treats inside. There were some staff members who worked at other places within the region, but they were not specifically, they weren't able to specifically come to this site on a regular basis. And the building also did not have museum storage cabinets. So everything remained on open display while the building was closed to guests. And I wonder if maybe they had taken some of those on open display and put them in plastic bins, if they would have fared a little bit better during this time. So as you can tell, it was not as simple as remove, freeze, clean, return. And, you know, because it was a building-wide issue and it was present in every single room of the building, the entire building required cleaning, which meant cleaning the HVAC system, the ductwork, to make sure that they weren't hiding up there as well. So to briefly go over the recommendations, the immediate recommendation was to close the space. So they were back in the building because they were considering opening their gift shop for Christmas shopping. And luckily that area could kind of be stanchioned off compared to the exhibit space, because I just didn't think it was appropriate for people to be coming in and seeing birds look like this. Not only does it look alarming and it doesn't represent the species, but it also makes it look neglectful. And then the short-term recommendation, so I said 1 to 2 weeks, and I know that that's probably not realistic, but I really wanted them to know how urgent this was, that they really needed to attack this with as much time and money as they could. I did recommend discarding immediately the pieces that were not hazardous waste and were not on their museum property list. So things that were not essentially cataloged. So study skins, educational pelts, including the freeze-dried taxidermy from the exhibit. That was kind of newer taxidermy, very common species, and was just eaten completely. The cost to conserve that would have been a lot higher than the cost to just get some new mounts made. But that would require people coming in and removing the glass, cutting the specimens out of the exhibit and really would take a while. Also recommending hiring a contract conservator to organize and carry out all of this, the removal of every single piece of taxidermy and organic material in that building, and bagging it, and then proceeding with freezing or anoxic treatment. But then keeping it all bagged until it was safe to return to the building. So in a medium-term recommendation, within a few months, they needed to do a deep clean of the building, including all exhibit materials and the HVAC ductwork. They needed to look into ordering museum quality storage cabinet to house the taxidermy and other organic materials. This does still mean that you need to have IPM procedures, but it can be another line of defense against infestations. And they also needed, more importantly, to determine the future of this center and the exhibits. How is the building going to be maintained from here on out, even in the winter when it is closed? Who will carry out the IPM procedures and the housekeeping? They do have a friends group that helps them fund some projects. So perhaps some of those volunteers would be willing to carry this out, but they still needed someone to be able to organize it and make sure that it's happening. And then also not removing the taxidermy from the bags after freezing until all of those logistics have been determined and agreed upon. Longer term would be to train staff on IPM to what to look for. And by staff, I mostly do mean volunteers and people who are even working in the little gift shop so they can recognize what's happening. And then, of course, cleaning the taxidermy after all of those decisions had been made. Gave some examples of some museum quality storage that you can purchase that actually does have some glass on the front of it, so it can serve as a little bit of an exhibit and storage, especially for their education room where people were just gathering to learn and not necessarily to have a full-blown exhibit. And finally, my pie in the sky recommendation would be to improve the exhibit completely. So it either needed a complete redesign to make sure that each specimen was accessible and to replace missing specimens to make sure you can get in there and clean it in the future, or to just scrap it completely and create a new exhibit that's easier to maintain, easier to clean and to monitor. This is Yellowstone National Park, one of their exhibits where the taxidermy is on open display, but they're able to get into some of those glass panels and clean this on a regular basis, at least twice a year, and then more as necessary. But granted, they do have a lot more staff and are more supported than this site. They also needed to consider, hiring a taxidermist to create new specimens, ideally not freeze-dried, and hiring a conservator to repair and restore any of the taxidermy that they were able to salvage. Thinking through it a little bit, perhaps like they could apply for funding within their government entity. Could they seek outside funding from private donors or from some kind of fundraiser, or perhaps ask their friends group again for any kind of funding for this? At least with an exhibit, it's something that the public can see. It's a public facing thing, and people get excited about donating to things like this. But everyone, sadly, I am here to say that my case study does not have a happy ending. I actually haven't heard an update from the site, except for a couple months later. I know that they had not been able to do any of these recommendations. And in fact, one of the 2 staff members that I'd been communicating with had even left her position. I wasn't able to contact them prior to this presentation to see what's happening now that it has been a year and a half later, but I'm not sure. So instead, I can't tell you how they proceeded, but we can use this as an example to be extra vigilant if your exhibits include freeze-dried taxidermy. Even taxidermy with arsenic can be eaten. Store your organic materials in enclosed containers or cabinets. Even a plastic bin will be very, very good for them. And you still want to inspect them even if they're in these enclosed spaces, just in case there was an infestation going on that you didn't know about when you placed them in those bins. And then a big thing, if you ever get to be part of an exhibit design, make sure that you design exhibits that are easier to maintain. And you want to be a disruptor. You want to go into places and clean and inspect exhibits, making sure that you get to those infestations before they get too large, so that you don't let bad things happen in the dark. So thank you for listening to my sad story.
Thank you, Fran. We are still hoping that there will eventually be a happy ending. But I think you created something positive out of this already by sharing this information with everyone. So thank you. Next up, we have Pat Kelly talking about the risks from pests that make their way into museums from museum restaurants and staff food supplies.
Thanks, Rachel. Do you mind staying on just for a second, Rachel, just to make sure I want to. Let's see.
Yeah. See your screen.
Are you seeing the screen now? Or are you seeing my notes screen?
No, you're in the correct presentation mode.
Awesome. And first of all, Fran, thanks for that presentation. I was going to type a question at the end there, and then I got thrown on, but I was just wondering if you were doing any kind of pheromone monitoring in those open exhibits. I know it's hard to hide a pheromone monitor or even a blunder trap in some of those, but maybe you can jump on the chat and tell us if you're doing any monitoring in that. And if you said it already, I'm sorry, I missed when you said that. So, but thanks a lot to all the organizers here, to Rachel and Adam on the Museum Pest side, to Jane and Sue on the Pest Odyssey side, and kind of a shameless plug for the Museum Pests here. They have nice swag that I'm wearing that you can get on Museum Pests and order all kinds of sweatshirts and shirts, and I think they even have hats. So I'm sure Pest Odyssey has their own stuff too, but wanted to throw that out. So yeah, jumping into Cuisine to Collections, really my goal in this presentation is to highlight how food brought into a museum environment can introduce museum pests. I've personally seen it happen many, many times with bad results, and I hope by the end of this, you may have a better understanding of the risks that these pests pose to collections, and a better understanding of some of the pests themselves that typically are associated with food items coming into a museum. So, what we can ask ourselves, why are we even concerning ourselves with food pests in museums? Because the food is almost always there in some way, shape, or form. What's that mean? It means as the administrators in museums look at the money making ability of it, they count on that money revenue and the visitor experience, that people want to go there for an enjoyable day at a museum. And so they want that restaurant there. And also the fact that the local staff in the museum, a lot of the museum culture allows those people to bring in their food, eat it at their own workstation, etc. And so that's why we're even talking about this today. But all of the pests that we're focusing on today are ones that are associated with food goods or associated with the cardboard or paper packaging that food arrives in on. And these are the ones that have historically caused damage to museum objects. And so we look at our cockroaches, and this is just a handful. Obviously, this list can get much, much longer. But we're going to look at the German cockroach. We're going to look at some of the carpet beetles, the cigarette beetle, how we call it in the US here, which you call the tobacco beetle in the UK, or the drugstore beetle that we call here, which is your biscuit beetle. We're going to look at some of the silverfish species, book lice, and then a couple other rodents as we go. So to prevent pest damage of any type, museum collection managers, curators, conservators really need to become gatekeepers of their institutions. The collections held within the museum that contain all the natural animal fibers, the wood, human hair, skin, dried plant material. These are all extremely susceptible to pest attack, and a gatekeeper mentality is necessary when both when we have incoming collections from other museums. We talked about traveling exhibits. As we accession a new collections from a private collector, coming from a personal home, all that stuff, we kind of know that we have to really watch that stuff coming in. That seems obvious, but due diligence needs to be there also for the incoming food that's going to the restaurants, as well as for the staff lunches and so on. And so, we know daily deliveries from food distributors to the restaurants or cafes are commonplace in museums, and that the pests use the food from these delivery trucks or from the personal bags that we carry in with our food products to be that Trojan horse for these pests to enter the museum itself. The number one pest that we know is associated with food or cardboard in kitchens is the German cockroach. Here you can see one of our pest information sheets on the German roach from Museum Pests that kind of details the insect's biology, its feeding and harborage preferences. And we know that in a single year, 10,000 descendants can be produced from a single female German cockroach. So puts it into perspective of how quickly this can get out of hand, and it certainly does in kitchen settings. So yes, as I said, the Trojan horse for German cockroaches is often paper and the cardboard associated with food. These insects like to hide in tight spaces and in the gaps that cardboard and stacks of paper provide. Beside being an excellent harborage, there's typically food within inches of this packaging material coming from the food distribution centers, and so it's a perfect place for a German cockroach to be. And from what we know, the German cockroach, the name is a bit of a misnomer, as this species originated in Southeast Asia. And so what we know is that they do prefer what we call a tropical environment, meaning it likes high temperature and high humidity. And commercial kitchen settings provide all that warm temperature with the ovens and equipment. They provide a lot of moisture with the sinks and water sources, and there's food, so it's kind of a one-stop shop for German cockroaches in a museum setting. This is true also for some of the vending machine areas that we find in break rooms for the staff or in the restaurant areas within kitchens. So the damage that German roaches can cause to objects and artwork comes from them grazing on the actual objects themselves, and then from the fecal staining that they leave behind, as well as the visitor experience that definitely you wouldn't want if you're either working in that kitchen or eating food coming from that kitchen. So jumping away from cockroaches to beetles, the black carpet beetle, Adagenus unicolor, is one that can be feeding on grain-based foods and then can easily switch over to natural animal fibers and keratin-based foods. Their presence in food plants and flour mills is on the rise. I can tell you that because we do deal, Insects Limited, my company deals with a lot of the food manufacturers, and I'm getting more and more stories of this particular beetle showing up in food plants. And so they can enter into the museum through a plethora of dried food goods and then kind of switch over to the collections themselves. So here you can see the distinct carrot-shaped bodies of the black carpet beetle larvae as they feed. The larvae can reach a length of 13 millimeters, and they use their long swishing tails to fend off other larvae. The black or dark brown adult beetles at 3 to 5 millimeters in length can have a single distinct club at the end of their antenna. The males, females have two clubs that are very distinct as well when we're trying to identify this particular beetle. A second carpet beetle, similar to black carpet beetle in the respect of it being found on food, is the varied carpet beetle, Anthrenus verbasci. The larvae of this beetle are also commonly found in grain-based food products, and but it can be a major museum pest of hair, hides, feather, wool, and fur. And the varied colored scales on the back of the adult beetles is what gives this species its name. As with the other dermestid beetles, the larval stage is the one doing the feeding damage to collections. Adults are strong flyers, as we can see in this video, and the females will readily travel from outdoors to mate and feed on pollen, and then go back inside to lay eggs on museum collections. And as we saw from Sophie and Stephanie, this is one that can easily feed on the rodent baits. If those go unchecked for any amount of time, it becomes a good food source. The picture on the right is not carpet beetles, but I have certainly seen varied carpet beetles infesting grain-based rodent baits like this, and using that as a launching pad into the collections in the museum itself. Switching to other than dermestid beetles, these two beetles are look-alike species that can both cause considerable damage to museum collections. The cigarette beetle or tobacco beetle on the left can feed on tobacco, but it's also common in many types of spices and foods, and can attack a wide range of museum materials, including books and herbarium materials. The drugstore beetle or biscuit beetle on the right, depending on where you are located, also has a very wide palette of potential feeding. Very similar in look, and very similar in the type of damage they can produce. While the larval stage are not very mobile and live within a food source, adults are strong flyers and they can bore into books and other dense material, leaving this kind of shotgun pellet appearance as they feed or lay eggs. With their heads pointed downwards, the adults bore right into potential food, similar in architecture to like this drilling rig, that they can go into this harder material. Over the years, I've often used a training example using pheromones to locate a single Hershey kiss in a museum that was brought in by a staff member from their old Christmas candy stash. And this chocolate kiss ended up containing more than 30 of the cigarette beetle larvae, and putting the entire museum at risk. But you can see the shotgun pellet holes into this. So that was the Lasioderma cigarette beetle. With the biscuit beetle or the drugstore beetle, this is an example of a museum that I did consulting with that had an infestation that we tracked down to some of the food that was being fed to animals living within this natural pond setting. They had true animals living in there, and they had food for the animals. So not only human food, but animal food also was a source for these insects coming into the museum. I had a whole nother situation of a museum with the drugstore biscuit beetle that was tracked down to an aquarium in one of the offices of one of the staff. And they'd emptied all the fish out of there, but the biscuit beetles were feeding on the dried pellets that had been used to feed the fish in the aquarium. And these were coming out and going right into the collections. So in this situation here, we talked about freeze-dried taxidermy. This is an example of one that had the complete skull within this porcupine, and they had injected some type of proteinaceous material to kind of fill out the taxidermy, and the drugstore biscuit beetle found this as a food source, and you can see the holes right through the hide as they're feeding on the interior of this taxidermy. So here again, a wide range of food materials for some of these insects, all stemming from food-based material though. Silverfish can be damaging pests to books and archives and all types of paper. And they also use food as a common means of entry into museums. And it usually starts with cardboard used to house fresh produce or other food goods, is how they find their way in. And so here we can see the common silverfish, the Lepisma saccharinum, on a book. You can see just the way these guys move. They do like higher moisture environments. We're talking about 50% moisture RH that this particular species likes. And we compare that to the gray silverfish or the long-tailed silverfish, who can go down to 50% relative humidity and still thrive and do a lot of damage. As a lot of you in Europe are experiencing right now with this particular pest doing all kinds of damage. But these guys too can find their way into museums by tagging along in the cardboard and other food packaging that we see. But giving a lot of problems, I know this silverfish species is right now. Going on to book lice. This is the last insect we're going to look at today. And, you know, these can come in on the paper or boxes being delivered. These guys are only 1 to 2 millimeters in length, but they can feed on books and paper. They also need a higher relative humidity to thrive in, but once they get a foothold in collections, they can do a lot of damage. Here you can see the small size on this US nickel as they run around. Their soft bodies aren't conducive to drier environments though, and so lowering the humidity can help with this particular pest. As food suppliers stock up on cardboard boxes, which is how a lot of food gets shipped, we find that the sosids typically are infesting the stacked boxes, and then once the food is put in, they travel with that box to wherever the location is that they end up. And that's how they find their way in the libraries and archival storage. And then to wrap us up today on this topic, we can't overlook rodents as a potential pest doing damage at museums. And the house mouse we see here is small enough to stow away in some of the crates of food and slime fast enough to keep out of sight when they're being delivered, and then quickly establish themselves within a museum setting. Mice can do an incredible amount of damage to museum objects in a single evening. Chewing damage, staining from feces and urine are the most common signs of mouse activity. These are examples of mouse damage here, all courtesy of Dr. Tom Parker, and we appreciate that. But you can see the chewing going on and making nesting material out of some of the paper products as well, but chewing right through wood in several instances here, not to mention the fecal droppings and urine stainings. And this picture also from Tom Parker shows urine staining on the spine of the Odyssey of Homer, the classic tale retold for modern readers here, but Tom's version of the story was that the mouse would stick its tail end over the edge there and drop the urine down the spine of that book. To wrap up, perhaps the pest that can do the most amount of damage in the shortest amount of time is the Norway rat or brown rat. While typically too large to come in on food goods, rats are drawn into the museums by the food odors from the restaurants and from the food that the staff bring in. But rats have incisor teeth that never stop growing. Because of this, they really will want to chew daily, even if it's not food related or nesting material related. They're going to want to chew to keep those teeth filed down, and they can chew up collections so quickly and cause so much damage and personal distress to a lot of people as well. So, you know, as we in museums are the protectors of materials that are housed within our museums, be aware that the risk with food items in restaurants and those items brought in by staff pose a big risk. In becoming familiar with the pests associated with these foods and updating your museum policies. Your policies are really important here to reflect better ways to keep these damaging pests from ever entering your institutions, is what I hope the take-home message is from this today. But I appreciate your time with that. So I'm going to try to unshare here. There it is. Stop sharing.
Thank you, Pat. You packed a lot of useful information into a short amount of time. Thank you. We are scheduled for a bit of a break, enough maybe for a quick dash to the loo or for a cup of coffee. And then, Jane, what do you say? We're due to actually start up in, you know, just a few minutes. Maybe we push that off before we hear from Marie and Rebecca.
Yeah, I think that would be useful, Rachel. Maybe if we stick to the more or less the 10 minutes. So come back at 5 past.
Sounds
Yep.
good.
Resume recording. All right, we should be back.
Terrific. Welcome back after our very short mini break. We have 2 more presentations, as well as an interesting update on legislation in both the UK and the US regarding sticky traps. So thank you for sticking with us. And just as a reminder, after the sticky trap update, we'll also have time for open discussion and questions. We will also be posting the PowerPoints of the presentations on the Museum Pest website on the conferences page, and the session is being recorded and will be available on the Museum Pest's YouTube channel. And we are looking forward to hearing from Marie, who will be talking about teaching IPM in the Intermountain West. Take it away, Marie.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Hi, everybody. Thank you for listening today. My name is Marie DeRocher, and I am a preventive conservator. I work for the state of Utah's Division of Arts and Museums. My title is Preservation Outreach Coordinator, and this is my presentation about kind of just the roadmap, some wins, some challenges in teaching IPM over the last few years. So just to orient you to the work that we do, I am a part of a group called Utah Field Services, and we provide consultation and support to museums across the state of Utah. And so we're a partnership among Utah Humanities, the Division of Arts and Museums, and the State Historical Society. And we, since I came on, I kind of was brought along to be the preservation arm of this team just a few years ago. And what does the landscape of Utah museums look like? Well, we've got about 250, more than 250 museums, plus other collecting institutions. So we try to serve not just museums, but rural family history centers, libraries, archives, really anyone who needs support. And one of the challenges is the far-flung geography. It's a lot of driving to get to these different institutions, and also a lot of rural museums. And most institutions are small or medium-sized. We tend to work with the smaller ones since they need the most support. And we here in Utah will say micro museums, so even smaller than the kind of national standard for small museums. You've got really tiny single room galleries, but with really strong local connections and community anchors to these local histories. And I'd say most of the museums we work with are lucky to have one staff member, one paid staff member maybe, but a lot of them are fully volunteer run, and they're typically understaffed, and we're really plagued by a high turnover in these museums. And so that can be challenging when you're trying to create sustainable change and provide training. And I'd say across the board, you know, really inconsistent understanding of museum practices. It's kind of runs the gamut. It's Wild West out here. So I was hired as part of an NEH funded preservation education grant, focusing on creating training pathways focused on preservation for these little museums. We're talking about museums that will never have a conservator. There's, you know, I can count on one hand how many conservators there are working in the state of Utah, even fewer people who do private work. And so there's really just kind of this like gulf of knowledge and needs when it comes to preservation. And so the goals of this program were to increase preservation knowledge and skills across the state. I have developed a curriculum of monthly webinars and quarterly in-person regional workshops. So trying to really train people where they are to be able to do preventive conservation. And then a little bit more focused piece was to select 7 members of a collections preservation team who underwent, in addition to attending all of the trainings that we offered, they also received mentored support, and we worked with them to complete a project that had funding that was focused on preservation needs at their institution. And we're happy to report that we actually received a second grant, as of this year, to continue this work for the next 3 years. It's kind of the next iteration now that we have a team of people who've received this training. So one of the key tools that we use when starting out with these folks who joined our preservation team is the preservation site assessment. And so this is, you know, based on a map, based on a CAP. It's kind of our own tailored version, and it's structured around the 10 agents of deterioration. And so this is an opportunity for us to go to their site and really ask questions. And honestly, it's a lot of things that people haven't thought about. And there's a whole section about IPM, but also about collections care and housekeeping, and, you know, doors being, you know, doors, drainage, really thinking like building wide. But I would say almost all, if not maybe just a couple of the museums we've done, gosh, like 20 of these over the last few years. People are not doing IPM and don't know. And so finally, with that, we contracted an entomologist who teaches biology and runs a small natural history museum at a university in southern Utah. And so we contracted him to actually develop and teach an IPM webinar, as well as creating a regionally specific pest ID guide. I will say, you know, it's one of those challenges of kind of sharing space with someone who does IPM very well and also works in the museum space, but also hasn't done IPM like for a museum exactly. And so it's just a little, it was just a little different. And so we're kind of like learning and growing and modifying. And I think I would still probably point people to the Museum Pests as just a great first resource for that. But so, yeah, that was, I know I'm a little bit over time. I just wanted to say thank you and just kind of sharing some of the challenges and some of the successes through figuring out this kind of training with this group of people. So thank you.
Thank you, Marie. I think there are probably many people listening who can empathize and sympathize with the situation you and your colleagues find yourself in. So our final presentation till we get into our other discussions is from Rebecca Newberry, who is going to be giving us an update on something she has previously talked about, an odd problem to solve, update on IPM, and a load rate contractus, the odd beetle.
Thanks, Rachel. All right, sharing screen. All right, hi. And you all can see this, right? Okay. So I first presented this work at the 2021 Spinach and AIC joint meeting. And at that point, this was like a 25-year process. And now we're at a, 28-year process of trying to basically take down an odd beetle infestation at the Science Museum of Minnesota. So the odd beetle is an unusual dermestid. They're sexually dimorphic. So the females look like larvae, but they're not. And the males kind of look like little flies. They're very small. The like adults are like 2 to 3 millimeters long. And I like to say they're slow breeders and slow eaters. So they have a really long life cycle. Once the larvae hatch, they can live up to like 5 years. They can be dormant for a lot of that time. They can go for years without eating. And they're so tiny, you don't see them anywhere. And then the adults, once they pupate, the adults will live about a month before reproducing and then, and then going dormant again, basically. So they can even their larvae can even regress a size if they are not getting any food. So it's really challenging to track odd beetle infestation because they have these incredibly long dormant periods. So we'll find them. We have a large facility and we trap throughout the entire 9 floors of our facility, and we'll find these things years apart in the same trap. So they have these long life cycles and they can live in undisturbed corners of natural history collections really easily. And they are primarily found in museums rather than out in the regular world. So we can spread them around pretty easily because we don't see them, they're dormant, and we can inadvertently send them to other places. So the best control method, as with any IPM, is isolation, inspection, preventive treatment, monitoring. But with odd beetle, it can be really challenging, and little tiny mistakes can make a huge difference. So we started seeing odd beetle at the museum in the 1980s. And we moved from a complex of old buildings in 1999 to a purpose-built facility. So that's where we've been since 1999. And we knew that we had odd beetle in the old building, and we did have an IPM program of monitoring in place in the old building, but we weren't really good at keeping track of the records. The pest control company kept track of the records instead of the conservation department. And because of that, we knew where they were in collection storage and what collections might have problems with them, but we didn't know which other places because we weren't keeping good track of it. So we knew we had a problem. We froze and treated all the affected collections in the old building before bringing them into the new building. And due to that, we pretty much eliminated the odd beetle from our collection storage. But we forgot or didn't actually treat things like storage materials and lab supplies and things like that. So we moved a bunch of infested lab supplies into our biology lab in the new building. And it didn't take long to accidentally take some of those infested supplies and move them into our wet collections room. These are boxes of jars, and the wet collections are adjacent to the rest of our collection storage. And so within a few months of moving in, we were starting to catch odd beetles in the wet collections room. And then another infestation kind of popped up a couple years later when we had a loan that was returned. Unfortunately, was not treated before it was put back into storage. And we started to find odd beetle in the middle of our collection storage. This was a collection that was put in the box that it was shipped in, back on a shelf, and just ignored for a little bit, maybe a lot of it. And so this is a space that we've seen little outbreaks of odd beetles every 9 months to 3.5 years, depending on the stuff. So, we moved, so about 15 years into living in this building, we were starting to find odd beetle all over the place. And so we knew for sure that we had when we knew they got into storage, we knew how they got there, but we had no idea how they got all over the building. And I was really concerned about stopping this spread, but once they were everywhere, and this isn't we're finding one larva every 2 years in a spot on the 7th floor, for example. So at the, so by this 15-year period, we were, basically, I was just they're everywhere. I don't know what to do. And then I was at a spinach meeting in, I think 2015, and I talked to Tom Strang, and I was like, Tom Strang, what do I do? They're everywhere. I don't know where they're coming from. I'm not finding them frequently enough to do anything about it. And he was like, well, sorry, but also why don't you try mapping them? So I decided that I would start to map. I was able to use PowerPoint. So I basically, what I do with the PowerPoint is that I copy a floor plan into each slide. And then I put these markers. So I track males, females, and larvae because you can tell them apart and they might give you something, especially if you see adults, you might know that they're breeding at that moment. And then to animate this, you can just run through your PowerPoint really fast. So that's going to take about a minute. I will do that. You don't need to pay attention to anything particular, just watch the patterns. And this is 25 years of data in one space. So you can see that they're kind of moving around. We've only been in the building for a year at this point, and they're mostly in the biology lab, which is in the lower center of the picture. But they're just continuously popping up all over the place. And sometimes they seem to wane, and sometimes they come harder. About 2010, we did start to apply a residual synthetic pyrethrin in the biology lab around the doors and behind some freezers. But we weren't really seeing a ton of change. And I think that's just because we weren't thinking about the regularity of when they would be breeding. So we were missing the points when it would be the most effective to spray. But then we started to expand our spraying into storage. And we started doing that around 2017. As you can see, the incidences of the insects have gone way down, and we've been pretty much odd beetle free until I submitted this abstract. And then we, of course, found a few that showed up. So I was like, oh, great, of course. So we're going to do some more spraying starting now and see if we can then do it regularly. I was using the mapping as a way to think about predicting when there might be infestations so that we could preemptively spray, but we stopped doing that because it was really hard to predict. They're all over the building. And so what we decided to do is basically just spray in response. So when we would catch an odd beetle, we do spray that space. And then we think about then we look at the maps and figure out other places where they were popping up around the same time, in the past, and then we'll spray those spaces too. So we're spraying a synthetic pyrethrin. It's either Demand CS or Alpine, and that's a water-based application that has to be applied by a pest control contractor. This is a contractor we worked with for many years, Josh Walden, and he and I really put our heads together to try and solve this problem. So I want to give him a shout out. So I also have used Excel as a visualization tool, and this is a complicated looking thing, but basically the X's are when we've caught when we've trapped odd beetle, and these are like in all the locations of the building. So you can see it starts from 1999, goes through 2012, and then the second row is 2012 to now. And you can see that we really hit like peak saturation in like 2016, 2017, but then we started spraying and it's really drastically reduced the numbers. So basically, stay tuned again. This is my last slide from the last time, but one of the things we do in order to prevent things from biology lab getting into collection storage is everything gets frozen before it goes into collection storage, and that has remained a pretty effective way. And then we are trying to predict those outbreaks, but we're definitely finding that just spraying in response to the outbreaks is more effective. And we're going to go back to spraying our collection areas on a yearly basis just to be safe. We try to reduce that pesticide use, but in this way, I think that it's going to be an effective thing to do. And we'll continue regularly monitoring to see that. So hopefully in a couple of years, we'll have no more odd beetles. So you can get in touch with me or with Victoria Felice, who's our conservation technician and is currently running the IPM program. And I want to thank because this is a long 28-year project. It was started by Gretchen Anderson, who was the conservator here at the time, and obviously Tom Strang. Josh Walden was our pest control contractor at Adams Pest Control. Victoria's really done a great job of taking this over, and Vern Anderson, Gretchen's dad, who is a great cartoonist. I think that's me.
Thank you, Rebecca. Okay. We have Joel on the screen. Do we have Chris as well?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Chris.
Hello.
And I think we're inviting Pat as well. And there have been some recent developments on legislation in the UK and in the US about the appropriate use of sticky traps. And I think this is important for everyone to hear. And we have some thoughts on how we might use our respective groups to deal with the situation. So Chris, do you want to present first on what's going on in the UK, and then we'll have Joel and Pat talk about the US.
Yes, hopefully I'll be able to share the screen. Just a quick introduction. Hopefully I can safely say good afternoon to all. My name's Chris Swindells. I've worked in the pest control industry for 24 years, and I've had the privilege of working with a few of the museums in the UK. And I've put together a few slides here just for an update, and it's primarily aimed at the UK update for rodent glue trap use. So in the UK, we have a body called DEFRA, and they finally announced key principles, costs and dates for glue board of the licensing scheme. And this is due to come into force at the end of July. It's taken 2 years to get to this point, but they finally come up with the conditions that need to be met for glue board use. The key thing here is that this is for glue boards used for catching rodents. I'll touch on sort of like insect monitoring on one of the latter slides. But the key thing is that the use of glue boards is prohibited for catching rodents unless it's installed by a professional pest controller who's obtained a license, and it's for the purpose of preserving public health or safety. And they've come up with quite a lot of conditions, and obviously there's a cost associated with this licensing scheme as well. So some of the conditions that are put on the people applying for licenses, that they have to carry out a pre-survey, they have to demonstrate that all other control methods have failed. When they actually use the glue boards, they'll have to put their name, their contact details on it, the license number. the glue boards will have to be physically checked every 6 hours. The person running the control program needs to be or remain on site unless they're relying on some technology to monitor the glue boards. And if the latter is the case, they have to respond to a capture within 2 hours. And obviously there's other considerations that they use an appropriate size trap for the species being targeted. And that obviously it goes without saying that anything caught has to be dispatched humanely. But the other stipulation is that a releasing agent needs to be on hand to allow the release of any non-targets that are accidentally caught. The costs associated to this licensing scheme in the UK are quite surprising, and I think even the British Pest Control Association were a little bit surprised. So there's going to be 2 licenses available to the professional pest controllers. There'll be a class license where you're able to register in advance, and it permits the use in 3 specific situations: in aircraft, hospital operating rooms, and critical infrastructure sites at imminent risk of fire or equipment failure. And you can apply for this license in advance, but each time you use it, you've got to report to the licensing authority. In this case, it'd probably be DEFRA, if not Natural England, within 5 working days after use. And for the privilege of this license, it's £180 to register, £230 each time you use the license, and then an annual renewal fee of £121. And if DEFRA have to intervene or do some further investigation, they'll charge you £121 an hour for the privilege. The individual license, again, is something that's available. You'll be able to apply for a single-use license at the time of need, but the current proposed cost is £535 for that one-off event. And again, you'll be charged £121 an hour if DEFRA need further information with regards to the license application. But again, the examples where you can use this individual license are quite restrictive. And again, the examples quoted include care homes, hospitals, food manufacturing, or laboratories. So unfortunately, at the moment, there is no current provision for cultural heritage protection. And the other key thing is it doesn't actually cover restaurants, which you may have within a museum setting or environment either. And needless to say, it doesn't cover premises. So although we're a United Kingdom, we do like to make it a little bit difficult for ourselves. So this Glue Trap Offences Act is specific to England, but in Wales, they come up with some alternative legislation which is already enforced. And basically, the use of glue boards for rodent control is not allowed under any circumstance. So that's quite simple. In Scotland, they've got the Wildlife Management and Muirburn Bill. Initially, the Scots were looking to ban glue board use completely, but now, following some lobbying, they've included an amendment which will hopefully, according to the BPCA, allow some room for professionals to use glue traps for rodent control. So that's the key update on the glue traps for rodent control. And I think it's just worth touching on insect glue traps, because there's a little bit of confusion in that people are probably a little concerned that some of these insect glue traps can also inadvertently catch mice or juvenile rats or non-target small mammals. But the key thing here is that insect glue traps used in the UK for monitoring insect pest activity do not fall within the remit of the current and proposed legislation on rodent glue trap use. But what we would say is that obviously there's a small risk with some of these traps, specific designs of, so for due diligence purposes and to reduce the risk of an unintended capture, we would obviously advise that it would be prudent to risk assess your environment and how you deploy the traps. Specifically, if you're doing some insect monitoring in an area, gallery, a room, a house, where you maybe know there's some rodent activity or non-target pest activity. I mean, typically most people sticking insect traps in roof spaces or whatever might be aware of the presence of bats, etc. So other things that you could do to cover yourself for due diligence purposes, it might be looking at where you locate the traps, the use of alternative trap designs, or providing a physical barrier around the trap. There are proprietary systems, covers, or you can make your own, or people even advocate putting a little bit of tape over some of the museum type traps. So I'll just finally finish off with just the different examples that are out there. There's many of them, and there's various ones. That the rodent ones tend to be obviously bigger, flatter, to allow the capture of the rodent. But the insect traps on the left, there's the museum style traps. Even these small little, in this case, eco trap or museum trap, they're quite capable of catching a small mouse. And the blue hoi hoi trap is probably one of the most popular traps for catching Oriental and German cockroaches, but it's also a very good trap at catching small mammals and rodents too. So these are the sort of traps that you might see in some of your environments, and where you might want to take mitigating measures to prevent any inadvertent capture. So that was a quick, brief run through of the changing UK legislation. Hope it was of interest, and I will stop sharing and pass on to the next presentation.
Chris, Pat Kelly here. Can you tell us, so what if you are monitoring in a museum environment, you haven't seen rodents, you put out one of the traps you just showed us, and a rodent ends up in it? What are you supposed to do at that point? Are there fines involved? What's going on at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the real world, unfortunately, these things do happen. And I think it's a case of just protecting yourself as best as possible, in that you obviously need to carry out your insect monitoring using the traps that are available. Many of the museums I deal with, they'll have a contract in place, and they predominantly look after the rodent monitoring side of things, and the insect monitoring might be done in-house. So again, there's the option that the institution can contact their contractor to come out and deal with anything that's caught. But I think if you demonstrate that you've done all your due diligence, you've risk assessed the environment, there's no known history, and you do your monitoring and you inadvertently catch something, then I don't think anyone's gonna sort of like haul you over the coals and prosecute you for that. If you put out the traps in an environment where you know there is rodent activity, but you've not taken any mitigating circumstances, then maybe there might be a risk of, I don't know, some further investigation or whatever. But I guess we will unfortunately have to wait until someone becomes the first prosecution before we find the level that the authorities will deal with.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between the actual legislation and then the policing of that too is going to make a big difference on how this is all unfolds. But here in the US, we really don't have any of this yet. And I think Joel's going to go over some of the legislation put out in the state of New York right now. But we're kind of looking at you to, give us a little idea of what we might be up to on the US side of this too. So I really appreciate all that information. Joel, you want to talk about what's going on in New York?
Sure. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
So fortunately, the federal government in the United States is a little bit slower than the House of Lords. In the New York State Senate, there's a bill S6314A, and in their House Assembly, sister bill A4785A, which is proposing to ban all the sale and use of pest glue sticky traps in New York State. It initially started in 2021-22 legislative session. And right now, as I see it on the New York State Senate website, the Assembly side of it has gone to committee for Consumer Protection Committee for them to review it. It was on the agenda for today, last week, and this morning it disappeared from their agenda. So that being said, it seems that the legislators, the senators and the representatives do not really quite understand how insect glue traps are used as monitors. Nor do they understand that we use UV sticky cards and large UV sticky cards in UV lights to monitor for moths and carpet beetles and such, or they are a critical component in pheromone traps. So at this point, it would be really great to get people to write senators on the committee and the representatives in the assembly that are on that committee. I have personally written the Speaker of the House of the Assembly of New York and have not gotten a response. So now would be a good time to try to bring attention to that, that museums, it would be great if museums had an exemption for low tack glue insect cards. As you know, museums do not target vertebrate pests with our monitors. So that's kind of where New York is right now. Why would anyone care if they weren't in New York? I would have to say, with sharing of collections, internationally, worldwide, it makes it harder for everyone with collection care if we didn't have that tool in our toolbox, right?
Yeah, I think there's huge implications. I mean, the wording in the New York legislation did not say rodent specific. Chris, in his presentation, he had underlined that it is specific for catching rodents. The New York legislation just said pest glue traps, right, Joel, in that respect. But the
the only place that mentions the assembly side of it mentions insect monitors, but it's very brief, and everything's kind of buried and vague at this point.
But there are huge implications that go way above and beyond even museums if they're going to outlaw any kind of trap that uses an adhesive glue in the US. So you know, I think making that determination between the two is important. Again, it's hard to do that because if you're putting a trap down for an insect and a rodent ends up in it, like we discussed just a little bit ago, you know, is that a rodent trap or is that an insect trap? It's a sticky trap at that point. But I mean, in the food industry alone, I mean, 20 to 40% of global crop production is lost every year to pests and monitoring our food supplies. You know, even above and beyond our museum world here is a huge thing. And this same legislation affects our food supply, which then can affect our health with insect related things in food. So I think it's just worthy of our attention for sure, worthy of looking at it and voicing your opinion, as Joel was talking about, if legislation is directly affecting you, or even if it's not affecting you right now, it's a strong potential that will in the future. I'd hate to see state by state legislation in the US where you can use a sticky trap to monitor for insects in one state and you can't for the other. I think we're all on board with the fact that the rodent suffering is something we don't want. We don't want to capture non-target vertebrate animals in these traps. And so, I don't think that is the issue. The issue is how this legislation is worded to make sure we can still monitor, because it's such a huge, important part of an IPM program to be able to monitor for pest activity. And a lot of the presentations we saw today are all based on sticky trap monitoring and, where those odd beetle are coming from and where the moths are coming from, et cetera. So.
Yeah, exactly. I would have to say in my number of years here at Colonial Williamsburg, I have inadvertently caught 3 mice in insect monitors by accident. And for the number of sticky traps that I have out amongst our many, many buildings, I think that's pretty rare. Does anyone else have anything to add with sticky trap update?
Chris, I just saw you put you can't even drown or drown an animal. What is accepted? Is snap trap? Is that an accepted?
Yeah, so I was reading that one was suggesting drowning, but for all the UK listeners, that is considered inhumane and illegal to drown any mammal, even a rodent. So yeah, in the UK, if we're physically catching something, it will be on a breakback trap, or if you happen to catch a rodent on a glue trap, then unfortunately the best method of dispatch is the dislocation of the net. So not everyone's going to be skilled in that, and many people say, "Oh, fold it over and crush it," but even crushing a mammal, certainly in the UK, is illegal as well. So there are very, I don't know. There are difficulties with regards to sort of like controlling rats and mice. I mean, in the UK, certainly they seem to have rights.
Right. Anyway, I think that's just an update of what's going on. We do appreciate the attention. I think there's some questions out there as far as what the deadlines are, Joel, and I don't know if you know that on the New York side that you can pass along.
From what I can tell, it seems like if everything goes as planned, it will be up for a vote early July. But now would be the time to write letters, send emails, voice concerns, ask for exemptions.
Yeah.
While things are in committee, now would be a great time to speak up. Definitely. Thank you.
Anyway, I appreciate the input from you, Chris. Thanks for jumping on this. I know you had a full schedule and it's getting late there too, and Joel, thanks for spearheading this on the US side too. Obviously being a pheromone technology company myself, and us selling our pheromones with sticky traps, that side of it is pretty sensitive to me, as it is to David Laughlin on his side with histrionics. And so anyway, we appreciate any of the attention that we can give it, and we want to make sure we can continue to monitor insects with these traps that we have. So.
Okay, I think I'm going to jump in now. Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Osgood, and I am co-chair with Rachel of MuseumPests.net. I'm just jumping on briefly just to help close things up. Thank you so much, everyone. This has been amazing, really fascinating talks, great discussions from you all. I just wanted to make a couple of quick statements. We'd like to make this sort of thing an annual event if possible. And we may be moving it to more of a fall type time of year. And we'd like to make sure, we'll be making sure that this doesn't conflict with other events and conferences as so that we're not interrupting other discussions. So with that, I'd like to just say thank you again and pass it over to Jane to wrap everything up.
Thank you very much, Adam. There we go. So I just thought I would conclude with a little bit of a summary of today. And there's a saying that the UK and the US are two countries divided by a common tongue. And we sometimes feel that that applies to other aspects of life. But I think today has shown us that in IPM, we really are very similar. We've learnt that IPM can be very futuristic and is venturing into the world of nanoparticles, which sounds fabulously science fiction. But today has also shown that good old-fashioned basics are still key. Vacuuming is still the most effective treatment and preventive method, although it does help if one can actually access the spaces that need cleaning. Designers, please take note. Lidded plastic boxes, those with well-fitting lids, are a very successful protection method, and it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. One of the animal protection charities here in the UK used to have an annual campaign called A Dog is for Life, Not Just for Christmas. And I think today has reinforced that IPM is for life and not just for the short term. Well, certainly it's for 28 years and counting in some instances. We obviously still need to get the word out about IPM, especially to small museums, and that's just as true in the UK as it is in the US. And I think that the presentations today are an excellent illustration of why IPM matters, and perhaps we should be pointing some of those small museums to the recording of this once it's gone live on the Museum Pests website. It's awards ceremony time at the moment. So I think that we can all agree that the first IPM award for Best Animation should go to Pat Kelly. Thank you, Pat, for entertaining us all hugely. And we very much look forward to seeing him at the Oscars next year. But I think the thing that I will most take away from today is that mice are no respecters of classical culture. So thank you very much to all our presenters for a hugely interesting and entertaining few hours. It's been fabulous to find so many commonalities from all of us. I echo Adam very much in the hope that this will become an annual event. And I know that there are people from other places, not just the UK and the US, and we very much look forward to hearing about your experiences and indeed any issues that you're having with legislation in your own countries at our next meeting. So do look out for the recording and the presentations on the Museum's Pest website and on their YouTube channel. And we look forward very much to seeing you next year. And as I said before, if you've not yet signed up to either the Pest list or to the Pest Odyssey forum, please do come and join us. And hopefully we can continue the conversation. Huge thanks again to Lynn for facilitating us with the Zoom meeting. Thank you very much for that. And massive thanks to Rachel and to Sue for getting this pulled together. And also thank you to Adam. So Enjoy the rest of your day or your evening, depending on where you are. Thank you very much for being with us, and we hope to see you again soon.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording.